Welcome to another episode of Seeing Them Live, a podcast featuring memorable concert stories from live music fans. Everyone has a concert story, and hopefully, one day, we'll hear yours. And now, we'll hear Paul's.
So after the show, we just sort of hung around by the exit, not knowing what to expect. And sure enough, out comes Paul and Linda and Denny McLean. And I was waving at him, smiling like that. He tosses me a cigarette pack, which I thought was a senior service. It was what they smoked, or he smoked for a while. I had that thing in a glass case for a while. It's one of the things that did not survive.
Today, our guest is Paul Peterson. Paul is a retired technology manager and lifetime audiophile. He is the creator, host, and producer of the podcast, An Avid Listener, which is available on Spotify. Paul, welcome to Seeing Them Live.
Thanks, Charles.
There's a lot here to talk about. You've been going to concerts since 1969, and out of all my years of chatting with people about live music and concerts, I have never met anybody who has seen the Doors. That was your first concert. You were 16, took place at the Auditorium Theater. This was 1969, June 14th, I believe. So yeah, if you just want to talk about that experience and what that was like.
Well, yeah, I grew up in the 60s. So the Beatles, right? Big stars. And when you look at 67 through 71, my years as a high school senior and college, the music that came out, the Doors, the Beatles finished, some of their best work. And all these groups, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, all these groups were forming. They were all around. And we just went to concerts whenever we could. Money was tight. But for example, I saw Paul McCartney and Wings. The ticket was $9.50. The Doors, who I saw, they said the gross receipts were $44,000. This was a major band, right? And so the Doors was my first record I ever owned was Sgt. Pepper. Number 2 was Strange Danger. And so they were on their third album promoting that. I read somewhere that Morrison liked the Auditorium Theater. Now, the Auditorium Theater, if you've ever been there, is very old school, red carpet. I mean, wow, what are we rock stars doing in here, right? And so it gave credibility to the band. He just came off Miami, the arrest in Miami. Nobody, I think, thought that was going to happen in Chicago, but, it made everybody a little nervous. But the acoustics were great. The seating was great. Morrison was nipping back behind one of the amps to sip a beer. You could see the glint of the glass every now and then. And my cousin and I went and then took the train to a suburban home in Berwyn, my cousin's house in Berwyn. And, recalling the concert was kind of hard. It was so long ago. And so acoustics were important. And in Chicago, concerts in the old stadium, which was steel girders and wood slatted chairs for hockey. And there was a lot of echo. And then you get to Auditorium Theater, good stuff there. And of course, a lot of smaller clubs, Park West and Fitzgerald's out in Berwyn. So the acoustics are a little bit more roomy. When I heard Morrison talk about the acoustics, that sort of caught me as I don't want to go anywhere where it's hard to hear. So things like Soldier Field kind of get ruled out. Certainly an event. Recently, we saw Elton John there, and it was well orchestrated. But it's hard to know. It's hard to be part of a group that big. So you go to the Aragon Ballroom, you can stand there and have a beer and talk or dance. So going to concerts and sitting still for 3 or 4 hours or whatever it was always not my favorite thing.
Yeah, I went to see the band, The National, last year at the Auditorium. And you can't beat the acoustics in that place. And I know you can appreciate that as being an audiophile. You take notice of that, I'm sure. But yeah, you could hear like on some songs, you could literally hear a pin drop in there. And it was really fabulous.
And you can experience more of that now at home, get surround sound and things like that.
Paul, you and I don't know if it was your cousin or whoever, about 6 weeks later, you guys tried to make a trek out to Woodstock, New York, see the concert, but it didn't pan out too well.
I lived in Schaumburg, which is a farm community. At the time, the mayor was a guy by the name of Bob Hatcher. He was a head of the big barn dance that was on Channel 9 TV at 6:00. So he was the mayor of Schaumburg. Schaumburg was switching over to suburban homes. We were literally in the middle of nowhere. We thought, we'll just hitchhike We didn't see a car. And when we did see one, he got us as far as Roselle. And I said, this is going to take forever. We're never going to get there. So we had a pizza and then had to worry about how to home. But so what we decided to do was, rather than go to Woodstock, we decided to take the train from Roselle, Illinois, into the city. And we'll meet some hippie chicks, spend the night with them, and then head home. Oh, I'm staying at Ed's house. And Ed says, oh, I'm staying with you. And we got downtown and, of course, didn't pan out. We didn't meet anybody. And all of a sudden we were arrested for curfew violation because we were just wandering Wells Street, and my dad said, let him stay there. So we sat in a detective office eating donuts, quite an eye opener. But we never, and we had a failed attempt with Kickapoo, which is another, but it was in Wisconsin, right? So I drove up there. We got stuck in traffic. You couldn't get anywhere near the park. So I stayed with the car. My friends went ahead with their fold up tents, and then it poured rain. And everybody was wet, and driving home, it was muddy and slow.
I'd never heard of that before. So that was like a year later after Woodstock, and it was the, what was it called? The Kickapoo Creek Rock Concert, and it was held in Hayworth, Illinois. And it was on a guy's farm. His name was Dave Lewis, and that was over Memorial Day weekend in 1970. And I guess, from all accounts, it was a giant, muddy, sloppy disaster.
I don't know that anybody heard any music. I know I didn't where I was. So I stayed with the car because we were in the middle of the road. I figured at some point they may open up. But so I have no idea what happened.
Well, from what I read, that he skipped town with like $250,000, and he was wanted, to go to. They were after him for him to go to jail, but I don't think they ever caught up with him. That was kind of a money grab kind of thing. So yeah, I'd never heard of that before. So I found that pretty interesting. But you never heard any of the bands then?
Yeah, that was the live experience. It was live for me.
You had mentioned that you went to a Deep Purple concert and you had fallen asleep there. And the reason why that intrigued me, because I went to see the Cowboy Junkies a long time ago at the Park West in Chicago in 1988. We had like front row seats, and my buddy, they're a real quiet band, if you're familiar with them. And he fell asleep. And we weren't like, we had like a beer or two, but I guess he was really tired and the music was really relaxing, and he had fallen asleep. So I wanted to hear your Deep Purple's a little different.
Once again, I'm out in Schaumburg. I'm taking the train in. I played at the amphitheater, I believe. If you remember their music, in rock, space trucking.
Yeah, right.
They were considered to be one of the founders of heavy metal. There were 4 records. Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple were really loud guitars. They had the organ. Richie Blackmore sort of screeched, and it so echoed. It was so much reverb. I think I just got a headache or a stroke or something. A few beers didn't hurt probably. And so my cousin woke me up at the end. He go, "Hey Pete, you just missed the concert. Let's go." I think I slept on the ride home, but that was a waste of whatever money it was, and a little bit embarrassing for my days. But oh well.
Yeah, man, it happens, right? You mentioned when you filled out the guest form on our website, you had seen Pink Floyd, the Dark Side of the Moon tour in 1973, which I believe was at the International Amphitheater in Chicago on March 7th. I've seen Pink Floyd on their Animals tour, and it was like one of the best concerts I've ever been to. And I just wanted to hear your take on that.
Well, so I was working at the time, and somebody I was working with said, "Hey, we're going." And we had listened to earlier albums, Adam Heart Mother, Uma Guma, Metal was their preceding record. There was Obscured by the Clouds, which is more of a TV show. But Metal was with Echoes was something we listened to a lot. And so I can't remember. I was trying to remember how much airplay the record was getting before the show. And I couldn't. And I talked to a few people, Mark, who was with me. Yeah, no, I can't remember. In other words, I was trying to put it in, was the concert new to us, all the music, or was it something we'd heard, now we were going to live performance? And nobody had seen, the British band, Pink Floyd. I mean, if you listen to the earlier stuff, it's non-Dark Side of the Moon, right? It's very experimental. It's very jazz. Sid Barrett, they did set the controls for the center of the sun. Very, very Esoteric. And then he came out with this very high gloss album, the Alan Parsons producing. And we knew he had been on the Beatles. So we go, oh, what's this over here? And so we get there, we had floor seats, and I hated that, right? It's just flat, right? So you're on the main floor, you were flat. So the further back you got, the less sound differentiation. I remember, it's a very moody album, very kind of, I'm trying to think of the word. I'll say atmospheric, so they get through the record. I believe played it pretty much end to end. It wasn't one of those where they interspersed their hits. They didn't really have any hits, right? So, but at the end, I remember the end of the show, they did no encore, but they got to the end of the show, they had airplane landing lights mounted up above the stage, pointing at the audience. And at that moment they finished, they hit the switch and put, like, I read later, something like 3 times the amount of electricity that the lamps needed ran through, and it just flashed out in like a tenth of a second. We were seeing white for a week. It was so bright with like seared eyes. So we go, why did they do that? And then later on, I saw Roger Waters in Milwaukee. He's got the pig floating around. He goes, that was a lot different than the pig I could take, the landing lights.
Okay. Interesting. The other thing I took note of was in 1976, you went to a Wings concert. Was that at the Chicago Stadium? And they played like 3 Paul McCartney and Wings?
Yes.
And you got an interesting souvenir from that concert. And I wanted to hear the story behind that.
So at the time, Paul McCartney had sort of 3 eras, right? He had the Beatles, he had first Wings, which is Band on the Run, and then he had whatever followed. And he wasn't doing Beatles songs at the time, either contractually or whatever. Or he said he didn't want to do it, right? And that was okay. We didn't go to hear Beatles, John Lennon and Harrison. We went there to hear Paul McCartney. He was doing the Band on the Run tour, I believe, at that time. I believe we had seats, and somebody said, hey, our seats are kind of near where the band's going now. So after the show, we just sort of hung around by the exit, not knowing what to expect. And sure enough, out comes Paul and Linda and Denny McLean. And I was waving at him, smiling like that. He tosses me a cigarette pack, which I caught. It's a senior service, which is what they smoked, or he smoked for a while. I had that thing in a glass case for a while. It's one of the things that did not survive. He just looked at me and flipped the thing with a cigarette. There were 2 cigarettes in it. We smoked them later, like you might do with a good cigar. I said, wow, that's pretty cool. Cough, cough. So keeping souvenirs. I didn't have the money to buy T-shirts. I don't know what the merch situation was now today. But the one thing I did learn, and I'm sure you know this, right? If you buy a CD from the group, from them, that's them, not that's outside of their publisher and all that. So many CDs they sell at the shows. And so I always tried to buy, well, at the time I had some records and later on CDs that if I can buy it from the artist, I do it there. Often though, they'd sign them. Dave Mason was in, and he had a concert at Siddery Winery. You ever been there?
Yeah, no, I've never been. I've always wanted to go.
Saw Leo Cockney there 3 times. Jim Petterick of Survivor, and they're all the Ides of March. They play there a lot. And you can have dinner and drinks, and you're seated at a table. So you're sort of cockeyed looking at it. The acoustics are okay. It's just, I don't know, having it in a restaurant isn't most optimal, but it's a really nice place. They typically have what I call B groups, either somebody one step below their prime, in the music world, or smaller new acts come through. Park West was a great acoustic one. Saw a lot of small bands there. Romeo Void, the Waitresses, Leo Kottke. I think we said 4 times for Leo Kottke. So, you had asked, why does he come up so often?
Yeah.
That was a great question. We were just enthralled with his 6 and 12 string. I had a friend, Mario, who was probably the biggest influence on my musical choice, and then my cousin, because we were always sharing information. We used to record tapes. Hey, I just bought the Doors record. My cousin didn't have it, so I'd record 3 tapes on a reel-to-reel thing. We'd send it in the mail. 8 days later, he'd get the tape and he'd hear, oh, wow, and he'd send me back something like Brian Auger. That's how I learned about Brian Auger. So we had this little tape system with my cousin that we'd mail it to the next one, like a chain letter. So everybody got to listen. And we had these old tape recorders, small, horrible sound, but it's just a way to share the music. So Leo Kottke just popped up. I had enough friends that were interested in him. There was always somebody who would want to go. And he played different venues. So he played the Opera House in Woodstock. He played Park West. He played Old Town Music. He was a resident of Minnesota. So there was a place up there. Whenever we went on vacation or something, we'd look and see where he was playing. And if he was there, we went. And so my wife we almost had him in my backyard. His sister was his manager. My wife met him or her for my 60th birthday, but they couldn't work out details. He sort of didn't want to do a yard. And I don't blame him, but fun to contemplate.
Yeah, I've been to several house concerts over the last, I don't know, 3 years or so. So yeah, that's very popular with people playing in backyards or living rooms, basements, etc. So yeah, maybe you could talk him into it.
I don't know. He's like 80 years old now. What was your favorite concert? I forgot to ask that as we were prepping for the show here.
Yeah, I would have to say it was the Pink Floyd concert, Soldier Field, 1977, for the Animals tour was, the first one that really stood out. And then other groups over the years, I've seen REM a bunch when they first were starting out, Jane's Addiction, a lot. Those are some of my favorites. The Lumineers. Recently, I've been trying to see some new groups. Saw the Black Pumas at the Salt Shed not too long ago. Going to see tomorrow night this guy his name is Mdu Mokhtar, like the modern day Jimi Hendrix. He's from Niger, and he's playing at Talia Hall tomorrow night. My wife's a big Psychedelic Furs fan, so we go to see them pretty much every time they're in town as well.
My daughter and I are fans of Keane from the UK, so they're coming back in September, so we're up for that. We did a number of Wrigley Field concerts. They're a little better than Soldier Field. So you had Billy Joel. What a great place, Piano Man. And they had a Green Day, Weezer, and Fall Out Boy effort. And we were supposed to see Motley Crue. Now, these guys have to be, I don't know, older than me. But it turns out they rescheduled because of COVID, and they rescheduled on my daughter's wedding night. And they were glad I showed up at the wedding and not at Motley concert.
Yeah, that would be a tough one to explain, right?
Live concerts have gotten much better because of the acoustics, right? Would you agree? They've gotten much more sophisticated as to what's on stage and what they can play. Because before it used to be, oh no, we can't go out and do this on the road.
Yeah, the more advanced thing. Like I watched Taylor Swift's Eras tour video, the movie.
Right.
Man, I mean, that is a show. There's a lot going on there, a lot. And it just, she could pull that off. Paul, I thought that might make a nice segue into your talking about your podcast, an avid listener. And I'll let you describe it probably better than I can, but it's like connecting the dots in your shows. You describe connecting the dots with albums, artists, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah. So the example that I gave the most, because a friend of mine, I was pitching this idea and he said, well, you should do Michael McDonald. So, Michael McDonald?
Yeah, he was part of the Doobie Brothers at one point.
His first job was as a backup vocalist on a Steely Dan record.
Okay.
I didn't know that, right? So he played on a song called Katie Lied. The song is called Chain Lightning, and it was on the album Katie Lied. The drummer was Jeff Porcaro. You know who Jeff Porcaro is?
I do not.
Toto 4. Then there was this great guitar lick. There was actually two of them, jazzy one, which is done by Rick Derringer. Just so out of place for what Rick Derringer would do. So Steely Dan got all these people, these great names in one place to play on that one record. Of course, it was great, but it was fun to track that. And same thing with Rod Stewart. He played for Jeff Beck, Truth, Dean Packett, and you got his vocal, switched the male vocal. So it's about connecting those dots. My wife said, are these dots that need to be connected? And I said, for some people, yeah, I think the backstory, Fleetwood Mac before Christy and Nix joined the band, and they were a very different, group. So we explore that. And Spotify's platform allows me to have audio interspersed with talking, so I can explain what they're going to hear, and then I can play different cuts that do that. That's a little hard to do. So that way you get to hear me explaining a few things. Then we play 3 or 4 songs in their entirety, maybe something you haven't heard in a while. For example, I just did 10 Years After and big jazz. And then he did some great, he has an album after Space and Time, which is the last record they had a hit off of. He plays with two players from Elvis Presley's backup band. And it's just a swing and boogie, band. And people go, it's like you listen to a group for a while and then things get in the way and you don't follow up. So I was trying to bring some of that back.
I went all the way back to the very beginning of your podcast, which I thought was kind of cool. And I don't want to say warn, but you let people know that you're going to kind of get geeked out a little bit with the equipment that you used. And I found that pretty interesting. I wouldn't consider myself an audiophile, but I did at one point spend probably too much money on stereo equipment. And, the next day had buyer's remorse. But I can appreciate some of the stuff you were talking about.
I've always had good stereo equipment, but it got deeper as we got into the vinyl versus digital controversy. So I have friends who would swear on vinyl, and it's okay. And it's certainly a different experience. But I found that when you get to a really well-mastered CD, right, but digital, got a lot of depth, they tend to be a little bright compared to the vinyl for some reason, which is a little warmer. I don't know what creates that. You hear the little snap, crackle, and pop. I just refurbished two turntables. We've been comparing all that. And especially when you get into a nice surround sound, solo room, I had a friend who said, you don't have to play that loud. There's a song where you can hear the silence behind it. One of the albums, Love, Martin took the master tapes, just mastered it, digitized. No accompaniment, just their vocals as they recorded on, their tracks. I had a guy who was there servicing the part of my basement, or rec room remodel. He had a tear in his eye because it was just bone chilling. Edgar Allan Poe by Alan Parsons. And I just saw Alan Parsons recently. That was kind of he was always the big studio guy, didn't want to leave because everything was, synthetic. And now he can replicate that because all these Moogs and synthesizers. I did a podcast on the Moog synthesizer, right? It brought in all that synthesized music, Pet Shop Boys and all that along, right? You want to know who the third person to buy a Moog was? It blows my mind. Keith Emerson bought the second. Mickey Dolenz of the Monkey bought the third, of all people. And they had played on one of their records. So it was, that's where we get geeked out. We go into some of the equipment names and Pet Shop Boy, and Depeche Mode and others, have used. And we had a lot of discussion. Are you modifying the note, which is like a wah-wah pedal? Or are you creating the note, which is what's synthesized?
And I was going to ask you, Paul, I was listening to episode 3.2, and it kind of sounded like you were ending the podcast, but obviously you had more episodes after that. So I was just curious, like, what were you toying with, maybe not doing it anymore? Or?
Well, Spotify's been kicking around. I don't think they have a lot of people mixing music, so they're changing the platform up a little. They want to move to a podcast that includes video as well as voice. So I'm waiting. They've told me I've got until July 9th. Everything I've produced will remain, but I can't create new stuff after July 9th. So I've got to look for a new platform. That's a little disappointing. So I'm trying to do as many episodes now as possible. So it was going to end at the end of May, and they extended it through July 9th. We'll see.
So yeah, you'll have to find a new platform then. Not start over, but just something different.
It's been interesting as I've gotten feedback from the people who listen, how personal music choice is and how hard it is to alter somebody. Even how many times somebody recommends 5 songs, so you play all 5. Maybe you get to play 1 or 2, right? We've got so much to choose from. How we choose is very hard. One of the things that I use a lot is Shazam, right? So you're in a public place and you hear a song, you go, oh, I like that. They don't announce what the song is, right? Shazam will pick it up and tell you what the song is. So that's something I recommend to folks because that's a way to expand your musical horizons a little bit beyond the normal playlist.
Yeah. I don't use it often, but I know people who have, and it's really unbelievable. All right, Paul, this has been a real pleasure. Is there anything you would like to add as we come up towards the end of time here?
No, I think you go out and support your artists and have a good sound system at home that augments what you do in the live concert.
Yeah, everybody who's listening, Paul's podcast is an Avid Listener. Check it out. He's got some cool stuff there. Connections, tying things together like he was just talking about. Thanks again, Paul.
Good to see you. Take care. Bye.
That's a wrap for our show. I want to thank today's guests for sharing their concert stories with us. Make sure to check out our show notes at seeingthemlive.com for links to websites, photos, and other artifacts mentioned in the show. I also want to thank my producer, Doug Florzak. The theme music for the show was composed by Doug and is featured on his album, Flagstone. If you have a concert story you'd like to share on our podcast, please visit our website and click on Become a Guest in the main menu. Then fill out the form and click the Submit button. If you seem like a good fit for the show, we'll contact you via email. I guess it's time to head for the exits. We'll see you next time on Seeing Them Live.